All right. So, if you have not been around, what we're going to be reading is called The Enchanted April. It is a lovely little romance novel, and I mean romance in the romantic period sense, not in the love story sense, of four women who go to Italy because their lives are particularly horrid because, well, they've kind of had a mental breakdown, and it's a mental breakdown I had about a year ago where I realized the only reason I was being a good person was to get something out of it, and I was getting nothing out of it, and it broke my brain. And that's where a lot of these women are at, where they've been good people for so long, only because they thought they would get something out of being good, and it breaks your brain, and eventually you just have to get away from the situation and reset. Which is what they've done. So they've rented a nice little castle in Italy, which is a real castle in Italy, called San Salvatore, and they're going to stay there for a month. We have in our roster the wife of basically a realtor. He has the same job as Jonathan Harker back in Dracula. We have the wife of a smut author. We have a young lady of the court who is unmarried and wishes to get away from the court. And we have an exceptionally old woman who just wishes to go to Italy because it sounds nice. So we have quite the cast of characters here, and there is a strong possibility for a romantic subplot to develop. There's a strong possibility with between the wife of the smut author and the man who owns the castle. It seems to be hinted at least. And you know me, if you start hinting at romantic subplots, I'm all over that like white on rice. I am there. All right? Especially when it's something that has the potential to be quite that funny. Because let's be honest here, a woman cheating on a smut writer, there's a level of innate comedy there that I think we could all appreciate. Especially since this book was written in like the early 1900s. So that would be just unsensible for someone to write, and even worse for someone to publish. But, you know, it's been written and it's been published, so I guess we'll just have to see how that turns out. So, with all that out of the way, we might as well get into Chapter 5 here. Hearing no objection, so ordered. This is after the ladies have... We've gotten the group together. They're coming down in two groups of two to the castle. And this is as they have left Britain and they are finally beginning to arrive in Italy. That's the context you need. Chapter 5. It was cloudy in Italy, which surprised them. They had expected brilliant sunshine, but never mind, it was Italy, and the clouds looked fat. Neither of them had ever been there before. Both gazed out of the windows with rapt faces. The hours flew as long as it was daylight, and after that there was the excitement of getting nearer, getting quite near, getting there. At Genoa, it had begun to rain. Genoa! Imagine actually being at Genoa, seeing its name written up in the station just like any other name. At Nervi, it was pouring, and when at last, towards midnight, for again the train was very late, they got to Mezzago, the rain was coming down in what seemed like solid sheets. But it was Italy. Nothing it did could be bad. The very rain was different. Straight rain, falling properly onto one's umbrella, not that violently blowing English stuff that got in everywhere. And it did leave off, and when it did, behold, the earth would be strewn with roses. Mr. Briggs, San Salvatore's owner, had said, "You get out at Mezzago, and then you drive." But he had forgotten what he amply knew, that trains in Italy are sometimes late, and he had imagined his tenants arriving at Mezzago at 8 o'clock and finding a string of flies to choose from. The train was 4 hours late, and when Mrs. Aburthnot and Mrs. Wilkins scrambled down the ladder-like high steps of their carriage into the black downpour, their skirts sweeping off great pools of sooty wet because their hands were full of suitcases, if it had not been for the vigilance of Domenico, the gardener at San Salvatore, they would have found nothing for them to drive in. There's a gardener. Chat, there's a gardener. Chat, this is exactly the right time period for the there's a gardener trope to start to develop. Chat, there's a gardener. Next thing you know, there's only going to be one bed. Oh, I'm so ready for that. All ordinary flies had long since gone home. Domenico, foreseeing this, had sent his aunt's fly, driven by her son, his cousin, and his aunt and her fly lived at Castanedo, the village crouching at the feet of San Salvatore. And therefore, however late the train was, the fly would not dare come home without containing that which it had been sent to fetch. There's a cousin too. Oh, I'm like chomping at the bit here. I can feel it. Domenico's cousin's name was Beppo, and he had presently emerged out of the dark where Mrs. Aburthnot and Mrs. Wilkins stood, uncertain what to do next after the train had gone on, for they could see no porter, and they thought from the feel of it that they were standing not so much on a platform as in the middle of the permanent way. Beppo, who had been searching for them, emerged from the dark with a kind of pounce and talked Italian to them vociferously. Beppo was a most respectable young man, but he did not look as if he were respectable, especially not in the dark, and he had a dripping hat slouched over one eye. They did not like the way he seized their suitcases. He could not be, they thought, a porter. However, they presently, from out of his streaming talk, discerned the words San Salvatore, and after that they kept on saying them to him, for it was the only Italian they knew, as they hurried after him, unwilling to lose sight of their suitcases, stumbling across rails and through puddles, out to where in the road stood a small, high fly. Its hood was up, and its horse was in an attitude of thought. They climbed in, and the minute they were in, Mrs. Wilkins indeed could hardly be called in, the horse awoke with a start from its reverie, and immediately began going home rapidly. Without Beppo. Without the suitcases. Beppo darted after him, making the night ring with his shouts, and caught the hanging reins just in time. He exclaimed proudly, and as it seemed to him with perfect clearness, that the horse always did that, being a fine animal full of corn and blood, and cared for by him, Beppo, as if he were his own son, and the ladies must not be alarmed. He had noticed they were clutching each other, but clear and loud and profuse of words though he was, they only looked at him blankly. He went on talking, however, while he piled the suitcases up round them, sure that sooner or later they must understand him, especially as he was careful to talk very loud and illustrate everything he said with the simplest elucidatory gestures. Elucidatory. That's not a word I say often. Elucidatory gestures, but they both continued only to look at him. They both, he noticed sympathetically, had white faces. Fatigue faces, and they both had big eyes, fatigued eyes. They were beautiful ladies, he thought, and their eyes, looking at him over the tops of their suitcases, watching his every movement. Oh, there were no trunks, only numbers of suitcases. Were like the eyes of the Mother of God. The only thing the ladies said, and they repeated it at regular intervals, even after they had started, gently prodding him as he sat on his box to call his attention to it, was, "San Salvatore?" And each time he answered vociferously, encouragingly, "Si, San Salvatore." "We don't know, of course, if he's taking us there," said Mrs. Aburthnot at last in a low voice, after they had been driving, as it seemed to them, a long while, and had got off the paving stones of the sleep-shrouded town, and were out on a winding road with what they could just see was a low wall on their left, beyond which was a great black emptiness and the sound of the sea. On their right was something close and steep and high and black. Rocks, they whispered to each other. Huge rocks. No, we don't know, agreed Mrs. Wilkins, a slight coldness passing down her spine. They felt very uncomfortable. It was so late. It was so dark. The road was so lonely. Suppose a wheel came off. Suppose they met the fascisti, or the opposite of the fascisti. How sorry they were now that they had not slept at Genoa and come on the next morning in daylight. But that would have been the 1st of April, said Mrs. Wilkins in a low voice. It is that now, said Mrs. Aburthnot beneath her breath. So it is, murmured Mrs. Wilkins. And then they were silent. Beppo turned round on his box, a disquieting habit already noticed, for surely his horse ought to be carefully watched, and again addressed them with what he was convinced was lucidity, no patois, and the clearest explanatory movements. How much they wished their mothers had made them learn Italian when they were little. If only now they could have said, "Please sit round the right way and look after the horse." They did not even know what the word horse was in Italian. It was contemptible to be so ignorant, and in their anxiety, for the road twisted round great jutting rocks on their left was only the low wall to keep them out of the sea should anything happen, they too began to gesticulate, waving their hands at Beppo, pointing ahead. They wanted him to turn round again and face his horse, that was all. But he thought they wanted him to drive faster. And there followed a terrifying 10 minutes, during which, as he supposed, he was gratifying them. He was proud of his horse, and it could go very fast. He rose in his seat. The whip cracked. The horse rushed forward. The rocks leaped towards them. The little fly swayed. The suitcases heaved. And Mrs. Aburthnot and Mrs. Wilkins clung to each other. In this way they continued, swaying, heaving, clattering, clinging, till at a point near Castagneto there was a rise in the road, and on reaching the foot of this, the horse, who knew every inch of the way, stopped suddenly, throwing everything in the fly into a heap, and then proceeded up at the slowest of walks. Beppo twisted himself around to receive their admiration, laughing with pride in his horse. There was no answering laugh from the beautiful ladies. Their eyes, fixed on him, seemed bigger than ever, and their faces against the black of the night showed milky. But here at least, once they were up the slope, were houses. The rocks left off, and there were houses. The low wall left off, and there were houses. The sea shrunk away, and the sound of it ceased, and the loneliness of the road was finished. No lights anywhere, of course. Nobody's to see them pass. And yet Beppo, when the houses began, after looking over his shoulder and shouting, "Castagneto!" at the ladies, once more stood up and cracked his whip, and once more made his horse dash forward. "We shall be there in a minute," Mrs. Aburthnot said to herself, holding on. "We shall stop soon now," Mrs. Wilkins said to herself, holding on. They said nothing aloud, because nothing would have been heard above the whip cracking and the wheel clattering and the boisterous inciting noises Beppo was making at his horse. Anxiously they strained their eyes for any sight of the beginning of San Salvatore. They had supposed and hoped that after a reasonable amount of village, a medieval archway would loom upon them, and through that they would drive into a garden and draw up at an open, welcoming door with light streaming from it and those servants standing in it who, according to the advertisement, remained. Instead, the fly suddenly stopped. Peering out, they could see that they were still in the village street, with small dark houses each side. And Beppo, throwing the reins over the horse's back as if completely confident this time that he would not go any farther, got down off his box. At the same moment, springing as if it seemed out of nothing, a man and several half-grown boys appeared on each side of the fly and began dragging out the suitcases. No, San Salvatore! San Salvatore! Exclaimed Mrs. Wilkins, trying to hold on to what suitcases she could. See, San Salvatore! They all shouted, pulling. "This can't be San Salvatore," said Mrs. Wilkins, turning to Mrs. Aburthnot, who sat quite still watching her suitcases being taken from her with the same patience she applied to lesser evils. She knew she could do nothing if these men were wicked men determined to have her suitcases. "I don't think it can be," she admitted, and could not refrain from a moment's wonder at the ways of God. Had she really been brought here, she and poor Mrs. Wilkins, after so much trouble in arranging it, so much difficult and worry, along such devious paths of prevarication and deceit, only to be— She checked her thoughts, and gently said to Mrs. Wilkins, while the ragged youth disappeared with the suitcases into the night, and the man with the lantern helped Beppo pull the rug off of her, that they were both in God's hands. And for the first time on hearing this, Mrs. Wilkins was afraid. There was nothing for it but to get out. Useless to try to go on sitting in the fly repeating San Salvatore. Every time they said it, their voices each time were fainter. Beppo and the other man merely echoed it in a series of loud shouts. If only they had learned Italian when they were little. If only they could have said, "We wish to be driven to the door." But they did not even know what door was in Italian. Such ignorance was not only contemptible, it was, they saw now, definitely dangerous. Useless, however, to lament it now, useless to put off whatever it was that was going to happen to them by trying to go on sitting in the fly. Therefore, they got out. The two men opened their umbrellas for them and handed them to them. From this they received a faint encouragement, because they could not believe that if these men were wicked, they would pause to open umbrellas. The man with the lantern then made signs to them to follow him, talking loud and quickly, and Beppo, they noticed, remained behind. Ought they to pay him? Not, they thought, if they were going to be robbed and perhaps murdered. Surely on such an occasion one did not pay. Besides, he had not after all brought them to San Salvatore. Where they had got to was evidently somewhere else. Also, he did not show the least wish to be paid. He let them go away into the night with no clamor at all. This, they could not help but think, was a bad sign. He asked for nothing because presently he was to get so much. They came to some steps. The road ended abruptly in a church and some descending steps. The man held the lantern low for them to see them. "San Salvatore?" said Mrs. Wilkins once again, very faintly, before committing herself to the steps. It was useless to mention it now, of course, but she could not go down these steps in complete silence. She was sure no medieval castle had ever been built at the bottom of steps. Again, however, came the echoing shout, "Si, si, San Salvatore!" They descended gingerly, holding up their skirts just as if they would be wanting them another time, and had not, in all probability, finished with skirts forever. The steps ended in a steeply sloping path with flat stone slabs down the middle. They slipped a good deal on these wet slabs, and the man with the lantern, talking loud and quickly, held them up. His way of holding them up was polite. "Perhaps," said Mrs. Wilkins in a low voice to Mrs. Aburthnot, "it is all right after all." "We're in God's hands," said Mrs. Aburthnot again, and again Mrs. Wilkins was afraid. They reached the bottom of a sloping path, and the light of the lantern flickered over an open space with houses around three sides. The sea was the fourth side, lazily washing backwards and forwards on pebbles. "San Salvatore," said the man, pointing with his lantern to a black mass curved round the water like an arm flung around it. They strained their eyes. They saw the black mass, and on top of it, a light. "San Salvatore?" they both repeated incredulously, for where were the suitcases, and why had they been forced to get out of the fly? "Si, si, San Salvatore!" They went along what seemed to be a quay right on the edge of the water. There was not even a low wall here, nothing to prevent the man with the lantern tipping them in if he wanted to. He did not, however, tip them in. Perhaps it was all right after all. Mrs. Wilkins again suggested to Mrs. Aburthnot on noticing this, who this time was beginning herself to think that it might be, and said no more about God's hands. The flicker of the lantern danced along, reflected in the wet pavement of the quay. Out to the left, in the darkness and evidently at the end of a jetty, was a red light. They came to an archway with a heavy iron gate. The man with the lantern pushed the gate open, and this time they went up steps instead of down, and at the top of them there was a little path that wound upwards among flowers. They could not fully see the flowers, but the whole place was evidently full of them. It was here that it dawned on Mrs. Wilkins that perhaps the reason why the fly had not driven them up to the door was that there was no road, and only a footpath. That would explain the disappearance of the suitcases. She began to feel confident that they would find their suitcases waiting for them when they got up to the top. San Salvatore, it seemed, was on the top of a hill, as a medieval castle should be. At a turn of the path, they saw above them, much nearer now and shining more brightly, the light they had seen from the quay. She told Mrs. Aburthnot of her dawning belief, and Mrs. Aburthnot agreed that it was very likely a true one. Once more, but this time in a tone of real hopefulness, Mrs. Wilkins said, pointing upwards at the black outline against the only slightly less black sky, "San Salvatore?" And once more, but this time, comfortingly, encouragingly, came back the assurance, Si, San Salvatore." They crossed a little bridge over what was apparently a ravine, and then came to a flat bit with long grass at the sides and more flowers. Sorry. No, I did say grass. They felt the grass flicking wet against their stockings, and the invisible flowers were everywhere. Then up again through trees, along a zigzag path with the smell all the way of the flowers they could not see. The warm rain was bringing out all the sweetness. Higher and higher they went in the sweet darkness, and the red light on the jetty dropped farther and farther below them. The path wound round to the other side of what appeared to be a little peninsula. The jetty and the red light disappeared. Across the emptiness on their left were distant lights. "Mexico," said the man, waving his lantern at the lights. "See, they answered. For by now they had learned see. Upon which the man congratulated them in a great flow of polite words, not one of which they understood, on their magnificent Italian. For this was Domenico, the vigilant and accomplished gardener of San Salvatore, the prop and stay of the establishment, the resourceful, the gifted, the eloquent, the courteous, the intelligent Domenico. Come on, he's gotta be a love interest. Come on! You don't get to introduce him like that. You don't get to introduce him as the guy who's leading them through the darkness and end it with the eloquent, the courteous, the intelligent Domenico. He's gotta be a love interest. Come on! Mrs. Aburthnot deserves this. Only they did not know that yet. And he did in the dark, and even sometimes in the light, look with his knife-sharp, swarthy features and swift panther movements. This man gets me! And his swift panther movements, very like somebody wicked. Does he kind of look like me? Does he? Swarthy? Swift panther movements? Just tell me bright blue eyes, it's me. We can self-insert into this bad boy. I'll get some art. We'll do it. We'll go the whole 9 yards on this bit. Gardener of San Salvatore, it's me. Hi. I'm the gardener, it's me. They passed along another flat bit of path with a black shape like a high wall towering above them on their right. And then the path went up again under trellises, and trailing sprays of scented things caught at them and shook raindrops on them, and the light of the lantern flickered over lilies. And then came a flight of ancient steps worn with centuries, and then another iron gate, And then they were inside, though still climbing a twisting flight of stone steps with old walls on either side like the walls of dungeons, and with a vaulted roof. At the top was a wrought iron door, and through it shone a flood of electric light. "Ecco," said Domenico, lithely running up the last few steps ahead and pushing the door open. And there they were, arrived. And it was San Salvatore, and their suitcases were waiting for them, and they had not been murdered. They looked at each other's white faces and blinking eyes very solemnly. It was a great, wonderful moment. Here they were, in their medieval castle at last. Their feet touched its stones. Mrs. Wilkins put in her arm around Mrs. Aburthnot's neck and kissed her. "The first thing to happen in this house," she said softly, solemnly, "shall be a kiss." Is this about to take another turn? "Dear Lottie," said Mrs. Aburthnot. "Dear Rose," said Mrs. Wilkins, her eyes brimming with gladness. Domenico was delighted. He liked to see beautiful ladies kiss. So much of this does not work 100 years later. So much of this has such a different meaning 100 years later. I feel like I do need to take a moment to explain. Back in the day, culturally, and many European nations are still like this today, a kiss on the cheek or on the neck or something, or even a peck on the lips, it was considered like a friendly gesture. So what that sentence means, Domenico liked to see beautiful ladies kiss. It meant he liked to see them happy. That's all it means. Oh, but it does not work 100 years later. He made them a most appreciative speech of welcome, and they stood arm in arm, holding each other up, for they were very tired, and blinked smiling at him, and not understanding a word. And that's the end of chapter 5. I like how much of this book turns out to be a comedy. It's been good for my heart lately. It's like funny, and it knows it's funny, and it knows it's setting up a really good joke, and it's leaning into it almost in a way that's self-congratulatory. But if you've got something really good, you should lean into it. That's the best part. It's sharing that knowledge with the reader, and the reader sharing it back with you, that you both know exactly where this is going, and you both know you're going to laugh at the end of it, even though you know everything that's about to happen. And that's the best part. It's sharing a joke with a friend. That's what this book feels like. It's like sharing a story with a friend. I don't know this author. This author is probably long dead. I would have loved to be her friend. She seems like a delightfully witty gal. But just reading this makes me feel like a friend. It's excellent, excellent writing. I know exactly what's happening the entire time. It has the same feel. Let me put it like this. I think this is a good way to put it. It has the exact same feel of a situational comedy, like a modern one. I can almost hear the laugh tracks. But it's not trying to be hokey. It's just trying to be witty and fun in a way that's realistic, but also a little bit self-deprecating, right? It's deprecating the women a little bit at their expense to get a laugh out of the reader, and it's so delightful. Also, Domenico sounds so delightful. I can't wait for him to just overpower everything in this story. With his Italian swarthiness. I can't wait for his Italian panther-like swarthiness to overpower absolutely every scene he's in, to the point where he is the focal point of the book. I have a feeling that's going to happen, and it's going to be marvelous when it does. I can't wait for that. He just seems so delightful. And I mean, think again about his introduction. That is the introduction of a leading man, if ever I've heard it. He's leading them through the darkness at a point where they're scared, right? His cousin, Bappo, has immediately scared them. And now Domenico has come in, and he is the strong, solid presence in the darkness, leading them through with the lantern to get them to their destination. That's the introduction of a love interest if I've ever heard it, and it's fantastic, and I love it, and I like him. I'm sure I'll get some reasons not to. That's the point of a romance novel. There's got to be a fight at some point, but I can't wait for him to overpower everything he's in because he's just that delightful. I have a feeling. All right, let's get into, let me get a drink.